I took so many notes on the last presentation. I really felt like it would be a great opportunity for everybody who's in sales to hear what Dave has to say about sales. I mean, if you're not familiar with Dave Mattson, he's the founder CEO of Sandler Training. Sandler, I went through it years ago, got a ton from it. It really transformed how I think about sales, my whole philosophy, helped me generate 20 million in sales, when I was out selling for startups. But Sandler, they have 19,000 salespeople who go through their training every year. It's in 31 different countries. They have training in 31 different countries, and there's 265 different training centers. So when it comes to sales training, it's one of the largest, but really how they differentiate themselves is the reinforcement training. I was a swimmer in college, and it wasn't like I read a book about swimming and then went out and swam. It was, I had practices, I had coaches, I had people working with me every single day, and I think they really differentiate themselves with that reinforcement training. So Dave, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me back.
So how did you get to Sandler?
I was actually a client. I had gone into the business world. My parents were teachers. There was no entrepreneurs in my particular family, no salespeople actually, and I had assumed salespeople were born. I didn't realize that you could be made and shaped. And when I went to work for an office machine company, they said, hey, we're part of this Sandler Training. And I was actually a hostage. I didn't want to go. I was like, this is not for me. I sat in the back of the class and I said, wow, this is very cool. This is counterintuitive. It's situational. I don't have to learn a bunch of scripts. And I just started practicing, and then I became their #1 salesperson. But that's how I became, same as you, Brian. I was a client.
Yeah, I took the training with Will Christ out in Orange County, California, and got there, and I had a few years of sales experience kind of under my belt, and knew enough to be in a lot of pain, have a lot of issues. Yep. And I got there, and it was just like, I remember I took a question. There was like a questionnaire that we had to fill out, and it's like all these different scenarios. And when we started going through them, I realized that a lot of the things that I thought were wrong, and I had no clue. And that was kind of when I first got the hook of it. And then it was great because every week I would just go back and I'd be working on all the sales I was working on, and then in the context I would get to learn. In those different, like the weekly trainings that we were doing. So it was great. So I'm really excited to see what you have to share with everybody today.
Well, thanks. Today I thought what we would do is to walk people through why do we need a system. And I'm going to look at it from two different perspectives. I'm going to look at it from the buying system that we all face when we're out there selling. And then I'll go into the Sandler selling system, which you were exposed to way back in '86, I was exposed to, and kind of walk people through the 7 steps, but also give them some tactics and strategies along the way. And my goal is not to convert necessarily people to the Sandler process, but really to understand what's going on in the marketplace, and then what do I need to do as an individual contributor to, I guess, create your own process, whatever it is for you that works. And for those that aren't familiar with Sandler, as Brian and I had gone through the program, we're, as Brian said, an international training company. We've won tons and tons of awards, but really what we're experts in is sales management, customer service. So anything that has to do with creating a common language within an organization, that's what we do. And Sandler is what I would call very conversational. I think that for us, anyone that's in sales, you need process. And I know salespeople resist process. I resist process. I don't like it. I fight the CRM product that we have. And listen, I'm a big CRM fan. We train most of those organizations, and I'm a fan of the tool. But I think by default, who we are, our DNA, we tend to resist it. But if you think outside of sales for a second, you need muscle memory. I mean, in sales, if you're going to be an awesome salesperson, then you're going to be sincere, you're going to talk from the heart, And the only way to talk from the heart and to really pay attention to our prospects so we can then formulate what we're going to say versus this contrived script that I have in my head that I read in a book or I saw in a class. The prospect says this, I say that, they say this, I say that. It never actually works that way when we get there. And the only way to just be you in front of that prospect, in my opinion, is for you to have your process down, to have it down cold so you know where you are. And you know, we're in the middle of the sports season, and regardless of what sports team that you follow or like or what sport you do like, every team has process and a system. They'll know exactly where they are, what they need to do as far as the next play, what's the situation. They have that down. And athletes, they continually practice the basics. They don't say, now that I've got a $25 million contract, I don't practice anymore. It's the exact opposite, actually. We do a ton of coaching in the athletic world. And I think pilots, they have process. And, you know, Brian, and you and I spend our days on planes occasionally. And every time I walk by that cockpit to go into the plane, they're following a checklist. And I know darn well that that person flew military, you know, aircraft, and they've been doing it a long time, but they still go through that checklist. And I know that's true in the medical field as well. I certainly wouldn't want to walk in and get open heart surgery with somebody that was winging it. You know, hey, Dave, thanks for coming in. Don't tell me what the issue is, but I'll figure it out once we're in there. I don't want it. And so I think the rule is that you as a salesperson, as an organization, you should have process, or by default, you're going to follow somebody else's process. And I think that's true, and that's the theme throughout the next hour together. And I think, you know, we're going to make fun of what's going on out there in the selling systems today, but the fact of the matter is, you as salespeople, you buy the same way that we hate prospects doing stuff to us. And so we'll kind of make fun of it, but I think that you do it as well. So let me walk you through what I believe buyers do. Step number one is they withhold information. They keep their cards close to the vest. And so they're tight-lipped. They're not going to walk in, you know, if you as a salesperson walk in, they're not going to say, hey, thanks for coming in today. I don't know you. I've been working with my current supplier now for 10 years. But here's all of my problems. Here's why I'm unhappy. Here's my budget, and here's my decision process. It doesn't happen that way. They tend to downplay the fact that they're having real problems on their hands. And let's assume that for a second they had a service issue. They don't say, hey, you know, I've got people lining up outside my office complaining. They've got customers leaving. You know, they may, once you establish rapport, but most people aren't going to cough it up. You know, it's almost like if you play poker for a second. No one says, at least the people I play poker with, they don't say, hey, before I put down my $1,000 bet, I've got a straight. Can you beat that? They don't do that. So they kind of keep those cards close to the vest. And I think that we've actually trained them to do that in some way, because in their mind, if they were just to say, here's the situation, let's cut to the chase, and some prospects do that, by the way, and that's awesome, but the majority don't, because they don't want to lose leverage. They don't want to tell you necessarily how bad it is, or they don't want to tell you the budget, because I think the fear is that if you said, hey, I have a $500,000 solution, or they have a $500,000 budget, that you're going to come in at $499.9. And so that's the fear. And I think outside in today's world, you know, movies and social media, they haven't really helped us. I mean, I haven't seen a positive movie come out of Hollywood. You know, I've seen Boiler Room, I've seen Tin Men, I've seen Glengarry Glen Ross, I've seen Wolf of Wall Street. I haven't seen where, you know, a salesperson who does extremely well saves a dying town. It just doesn't happen. And so I got that out there, but I also have that in my world. I said to you early on that I didn't grow up as in a sales environment. I don't think anyone on the phone that you were going to school or your parents nurtured you through college or through all the sporting events that they felt like they were a taxi service for you and nurtured you, and they sat you down at the dinner table to say, you know, when you grow up, I'd like you to become a salesperson. I don't think that's true. I mean, and to me personally, I was supposed to be a doctor, an attorney, an accountant, a lawyer, something, you know, or a teacher would have been great too, because then, you know, there's my son taking right after the family. There'll be another teacher in the family. But that wasn't it. You know, when I came home in 1986 and said, hey, listen, Mom, I'm in sales. As a matter of fact, I've got a total commission job. My mom almost fell off her chair. She's yelled upstairs, Dave, 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 I think David's moving back home. Because in her mind, it was one step above total unemployment. And it's not true, but I think society is kind of shaped it up that way. So if I put us back in the situation, you know, they're either going to do one of two things. And again, I'm over-exaggerating, but it's pretty accurate. Number one, they're going to downplay the problem that they're experiencing. They don't want to lose what they would think is leverage. Second issue, they may over-exaggerate what's going on because they want to keep their current supplier honest. And so let's assume for a second that they've been with the same company for 10 years, and they're happy, actually. Some prospects will tell you that they're thinking about making a change. And, hey, you know, I wish this could be better. But they're over-exaggerating a touch because they want to know if there's anything new out there, or would you do it for cheaper? And I think we all shop around our insurance carrier. We all do the same thing. You know, so it kind of happens. So if I put us in this world, because I started off by saying, you know, as prospects, we act like we do the same thing. If you were, let's say, buying a couch, and you know that your budget was $3,500 for this couch, and you knew that you wanted a red couch, when you walk into a furniture store as a buyer, and they run up to you and they say, hey, listen, may I help you? Most of us on the phone would say, no, I'm just looking. You keep your cards close to the vest. You could say, absolutely, I'm looking for a red couch. I want to spend $3,500. I'd like to be out of here in 30 minutes. But we don't do it. We start looking around to see if there's one cheaper than what we've mentally assumed is our budget. So the fact is, we do it. And I think we've all experienced it. Think about what happens in your world, but I think we've all been there. So here's the second thing that happens. They're looking for what I could consider unpaid consulting. I call this step proposals and presentations. That's the step that is step number 2. So let me show you where I am in the process. I walk in and they say to me, Dave, thanks for coming in. Hey, listen, we've got some, I think everything's okay, but there's a couple issues over here in service, blah, blah, blah. As a salesperson, I say, wow, okay, I've got some interest here. And then they say to me, would you be nice enough to put this in writing or come back to us and do a presentation? I'm not sure if we're willing to make a move, but if it's compelling enough, I certainly would give it heavy consideration. And so as a salesperson, I'm kind of weighing, well, I was about to make more cold calls, or I was about to go do X, which I didn't find as, you know, I don't like to do it, or I'm going to go back to the office and work on this potential deal. Most people take the path of least resistance. They go back and they start working on their proposals. Now, I don't know about what you specifically do, but most proposals, start to finish, are costing about 35 grand. Now, if we're selling a transactional thing, of course, that's not accurate. But it does take you time. It does take you energy. You probably got other people involved. You're doing all that stuff. And the reason why I call it the free consulting is because in here, you've learned about what their issue is, so you think. You're going to go back, take your 20 years of expertise, because the prospect really does want to know what you know. They just don't necessarily want to pay for it, or they may do it internally. See, I think your largest competitor in any situation is complacency, is the I'm going to do nothing, right? So that's our biggest competitor. So we're going back. We're going to cough up our knowledge about all the ways that we would solve these issues, and then hopefully we have a compelling enough argument that they're going to say, this was cool, this is awesome, we're going to move forward with this. And so if I put us back into it, I've spent probably 4 or 5 days. I've got all my stuff ready, got my presentation, got my super slick PowerPoints ready. I'm doing my thing. I'm in front of the group now, my prospect, a couple new people I haven't seen before showed up. And at the end, I do my trial close. And I say to them, so what do you think? And they say, that was awesome. That was great. You know, Dave, I have to tell you, I didn't expect to be wowed the way we were wowed here today. This was fantastic. What I think we need to do now that you've shared all this valuable information with us, is to go back and form a committee to start a study to see how we would implement some of the things that you suggested. So really what they have said is, I kind of want to think this through, which is okay, but most of us present thinking that we're going for an answer. And they didn't say, hey, thanks for spending a week on this. First of all, we're not doing 20% of what you just said. That is cool, because they could say that. They could just say, hey, look, this is great. We love it. You know, we have been working with our current person for 5 years. You are blowing them away. It's fantastic. They don't necessarily come out and say that, or they don't say this, which is, we appreciate it. I've been doing business with my brother-in-law for the last 20 years. I really don't see any interest, or I see no reason to change. It would be bad for my marriage, but I'm going to take all your good ideas and go beat him up on additional services and pricing. They don't say any of that. They just say to you, this is awesome. Like to take the information back, stew it over, socialize it internally, start a committee, right, to get the study going, and blah, blah, blah. They didn't say yes, but they also didn't say no. And so therefore, that's okay. You know, Sandler, you'll learn in a couple seconds that you really should look for the no's. But when we're in the traditional process, not hearing no is an okay thing, because there's hope. There's something maybe in the future. And so now, here's where we are. I've given them a ton of good stuff. I've done a trial close, and they've committed to nothing, which I call the unpaid consulting phase. And now they move very subtly into my last step, which is they disappear. And here's what it looks like. Now I call back. I've left some messages, you know, and now I've left a message saying, hey, I'm just following up. I've left a message saying, hey, my district manager's in town. I've left a message saying, hey, we've got a new pricing structure coming. I've left a ton of messages. And I think we've all been there. We've all been there where we've left lots of messages, and some of us are actually looking up the statutes for, you know, for like creeping, because it's almost like we're stalking. So you're in chase mode. I actually believe that voicemail was invented by the Independent Purchasing Agent Association and actually licensed to the phone companies, because, you know, until about 10, 15 years ago, all we were taught is that, hey, just call before 8 and call after 6 and you'll get the decision makers. But voicemail's kind of changed all that. And Brian, certainly what you do and what you bring to the table cuts through all that garbage. A lot of us are still stuck in there if we're not using breakthrough email. So I think we've all seen this out there in the marketplace. And I'd like to give you a tip on how to get through voicemail jail in a second. But any thoughts on, Brian, on this? Have you experienced this, seen this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I experienced all of it. And when I went through the training, I was writing like 60-page color proposals. And and we worked for a marketing agency, and we bound them, and they were, you know, we'd FedEx them, and they were beautiful. And I just thought this is the way that, you know, we would do it. And when I learned your system, and I'll let you kind of talk about that later, and I didn't have to do proposals anymore, it changed everything. One of the things that I look at is that the prospect is establishing their buying criteria. So, because I've always sold like brand new, you know, they've never done or worked with this kind of technology, and a lot of times they're educating themselves in the process, and, you know, in the first meeting they don't know what's important to them yet. And they ask lots of questions, and I, you know, educate them. But after the third or fourth meeting, when they, you know, talk to a bunch of different vendors, things are changing. So, you know, as they're kind of, I haven't had as much experience kind of dealing with people switching or shifting, you know, organizations, just because they're probably, most of the time they're just more complacent. But just really understanding, you know, what it is that they're, the kind of decision that they're making, and even if it's worth making a decision on it. So, I mean, that's kind of a lot of the stuff that I see in the market.
Yeah, you're probably competing with complacency. Do we make a switch? Is this valuable? Should we be doing this on our own? Or, if we actually admit to we need to switch over to what you sold or you're doing now, then we're actually admitting that we did it poorly. And I think that's always in there. I think there's this buyer-seller dance that goes on. And when you're selling to existing customers, hopefully that doesn't exist. But some even the more sophisticated buyers in the marketplace, when you're in the chase mode, they actually pop back up. And they say things like, hey, Dave, sorry I went dark. Here's the situation. We need the answers to the following 5 questions. And you run, like they threw the tennis ball and there goes the dog chasing the thing. You run and go get those answers, but you're really doing more free consulting. And before I get to the Sandler stuff, let me just give you a quick voicemail jail tip. And here's what it is. And you put it into any situation that you're facing. But if you were in front of a prospect, a customer, you had a good call, you're supposed to follow up, and now for whatever reason you think you're chasing. You think you're leaving voicemail after voicemail. Hey, it's Dave. It's in the afternoon. I'll be here until 5, and then you leave another voicemail. Here's my cell phone number. Call me. Then you leave another one. Here's my parents' number. I'll be there over the weekend. It's getting to be ridiculous. This technique works 35, 36% of the time. Here's what you do. You call back up and you say, hey, Brian, it's Dave. Left you a couple messages. Hadn't heard back. And you can even say, hey, I left you a couple messages about X, Y, and Z. I hadn't heard back. I got the feeling maybe you've decided to go in a different direction. And that's okay if it makes sense for you. But would you be nice enough just to leave me a quick voicemail after hours confirming that's where we are? That's all you have to say. And this works in an email as well. Because the magic of that for a second is that you're not pushing. See, stalking is, please call me. I've got a reason for us to talk. And you're pushing. When you push, people resist. The reason why this is magical is because here are the phrases. I got the feeling that you guys may have decided to go in a different direction. And that's okay if it makes sense. But would you be nice enough just to leave me a voicemail after hours? See, that's non-threatening. I didn't say, would you please call me back in the next 20 minutes? I'm sitting at my desk like a vulture, just waiting for roadkill. That's there's too much pressure. So if I just say, hey, leave me a voicemail after hours, you'll be shocked, because if I'm going to do a 2-day boot camp with a client, I'll give them this technique at, let's say, 10 o'clock in the morning. And I say the first one that can actually let us hear the response on tape, so let's hear your voicemail, you'll win a prize. You'd be surprised at how many people say, oh my gosh, I haven't heard from that person in 3 months. Here's the email, or here's the voicemail, and they're playing voicemails. It's a great tactic for any of our listeners to go try immediately. Now, for me personally, if I leave my voicemail jail, I send an email. If they still go dark, will I track it? Yeah, I will. But mentally, I've kind of moved on, because I think when you get stuck in the I want to think it over, or you don't know where you are, that's bad for your head. As a salesperson, I love no's because I kind of know where I am. I love yeses, obviously. But the in-between is where I just don't know where I am. And if you've got deals in your funnel that go from month to month to month, and you really can't tell them, meaning yourself or your manager, what is it going to take to progress this deal forward, then I think you're in that spot. So let me kind of go through the 7-step Sandler process. And philosophy-wise, or philosophically, first of all, Sandler's very conversational. So I don't believe in scripts. I don't think, even though I just gave you one, Sandler is not.
Yeah, I love that. I don't believe in scripts, but here's one.
I gave you one.
Well, 35%.
Yeah, it does work. Yeah, it does work. But I think the philosophy of the voicemail jail is, hey, just tell them it's okay if they decide to go in a different direction. You use your words, and that's the magic that goes. I think even in dating, think about this for a second. If you use this in your personal life, if you're dating and next thing you know, you're calling, you're stalking, it's the exact opposite effect. But when you say, hey, listen, I had a great time. I'm not sure if you did, but, I'd love to get together, and if not, it's okay. When you kind of pull back, people actually move towards you. And that's how it works. And it's human nature. See, Sandler is based on human psychology. And people are very predictable. If you would just sit back for a minute, remain third party, look down, not get emotionally sucked in yourself, which is the reason why you need a process, because then you can remain third party. But Sandler is a pull process. It's not push. And so that's really the whole philosophy through this thing. And there's a lot of other, what I'm going to call foundational topics for a second, but let me walk you through and give you some tactics and strategies on each of the selling systems. Brian said it's right. There's 19,000 people going through this 7 steps every single year for the last 40 years. So we've got a ton of people who've gone through it. And I can't do it justice in the amount of time that we have, but I'll do the best I can. Here's what I would say. If you don't like our system, find one on your own. Just go get one and follow it. Because I think if you believe what I said earlier, which is either you should have a system or by default you will follow somebody else's system, which I know to be true, but if you believe it yourselves, then go find something that works for you and follow it and then keep tweaking it. So let's talk about some of the steps. First of all, bonding and rapport. Now, of course, we want to establish rapport throughout the process, but I think that our job as a salesperson is to go in and create an environment of trust and make people feel comfortable sharing information. I mean, think about what most of us do. Most of us are in triage sales. And what I mean by that is you have 60 minutes in your first contact with a prospect. If your call is an hour, you have 60 minutes to establish an atmosphere where people feel comfortable sharing what's going on in their business world. They probably haven't explained that at home. Maybe some coworkers don't really know how bad that service problem is, but you're wanting them to explain it. So you've got to break down those barriers. We teach 5 different things to do that. We're big DISC followers, which is a behavioral model. But I think here are some premise that we have to think about. Number 1, you should be flexible as a salesperson. People don't get paid to see the world that you see. You get paid to be flexible in how you explain and how you describe what you do to individual buyers. And you and I both know that we've had great presentations with buyer A, prospect A. We said the exact same thing to prospect B 6 days later, and they didn't have the same results. That's because everyone views the world differently. I mean, I've got 5 kids. They see the world differently. Brian, you've got kids. They're different. So I think we have to go into it thinking it's not about me. I have to focus on my prospect, my buyer. We have something called the 70-30 rule, which is if you're doing it right, your prospect should be talking 70% of the time, and you as a salesperson should be talking 30% of the time. See, I think we are judged as salespeople by the information that we gather in the first couple calls, not dispense. And that's a huge difference. So most salespeople show up and throw up all of their product. Hey, thanks for inviting me in today. I've got a deck. It's only 675 slides. You're really going to love it. Put some automation, animation in there. Here we go. And it's a death march. So I think we've got to figure out what that is. And I even love some rapport skills. Let me give you a couple for people that you're already doing business with. One is touch calls. I do 5 a day. Here's a touch call. You can't physically be in front of all your prospects and customers all the time. It's impossible. So for me, I take a list home every day. There's 5 names. And I just place a call to them. And probably 90% of the time, I don't get them. But it's okay. It's called a touch call. And I'll leave a message. Hey, Brian, it's Dave. Just reaching out. Want to make sure everything's okay. Call me if I can be of help in any way. That's it. Now, I've got 4 different responses that always comes in. 1, they don't call back, which was my personality type. It's fine. 2, they call back just to kind of talk. Hey, what's going on? How are you? That's okay, too. 3, which is amazing, they call back with a referral. Think how cool that is. They'll say, hey, I'm glad you called. Here's the situation. They would not have called me otherwise. The 4th thing that happens is they'll call me with a problem. Now, that sounds like, well, why would you want that? Well, first of all, if I didn't call, See, I believe that prospects, customers, they let little issues fester until it becomes a big issue. You do that in your personal lives, we do it in our professional lives. If it happens because I called and they said, Dave, I'm glad you called, here's a situation I'd like your help on, I can get that dealt with immediately. And I think it's going to happen when you have customers. Every single day is not, the greatest. There's always going to be ups and downs with the customer relationship. So when they tell you that, that's a good piece of information because now you can solve it. So I love that touch call concept. Here's another one, client satisfaction. Here's what I believe. Every customer judges their relationship with you differently. And so I love to ask my customers the following question. Hey, what are the top 3 things that I could do above and beyond delivering a great product and service for you? Put that off to the side for a second. That's a given. What are the top 3 things that you would expect of me to make sure that this relationship is 100% satisfactory to you? And then I just sit there and listen. If they say, well, I don't know, then I give them some suggestions. But here's what I am doing. For the first time, I'm asking them what's important to them in order for them to feel good about this relationship. And if you notice, what I said was, hey, assume that I'm going to deliver the product or service that you paid for. That's a given. And what I do is I write these things down. And if I had 6 different customers that I'm dealing with in a specific account, I'm going to get different answers. And if I've just provided awesome product or awesome service, to me, that's a given. So as I meet each individual, once a quarter, I would do this. I would say, Sally, hey, listen, these are the 3 things you told me about, 3 months ago. I just want to ask you, how am I doing? Give me a grade, A, B, C. How am I doing? One was follow-up. You wanted to make sure that if you had called, that we're getting back to you on a timely basis. How are we doing there? And you ask them right up front to give you a grade. Now, here's why you want to do that. If they give you a great grade, like, hey, that's an A, you're awesome at that, you're awesome at this, and you're awesome at that. In essence, what I've done is they've verbalized out loud that I'm doing a good job, which is awesome. Because if they say it, it must be true. If you walk in as a salesperson and say, Sally, I want to start off the meeting by telling you I am killing it here, aren't I? They'll say, wait a minute, Dave. Oh, big boy. So, but if you say, hey, how am I doing? Hey, you got an A on that one. Then if they say it, it's true. But here's the other thing. If they say you got a C on this one, then I'll say, well, wait a minute. What do we need to do to get that up? And I now can work out a plan with them to fix that issue, because in their mind it is an issue. I wouldn't even have known. But I'm establishing awesome relationships, but also understanding what that satisfaction criteria is, because I'm fixing my issues as they come, and I'm also kicking out, shutting the door from my competitors before they're even there. So establish rapport however you do it for you. To me, it's fluid throughout the process. Here's the second step, upfront contract.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
So the client satisfaction, top 3 things.
Yep.
What has surprised you, when you made those calls? Like or how have you shifted or changed things at Sandler? Like, how have you acted upon it?
When I ask them what's their personal satisfaction criteria? Top 3 things.
Yeah, top 3 things to make sure the relationship is 100% satisfactory.
Yeah, so I hear some things that are, let's say, a little uncommon, like, hey, Dave, I'd like you to tell me what's going on in my company because everyone tells me what I want to hear. So, okay. Because you do hear things like, I want to know what's going on in the industry. I want to know if there's a problem before I hear it from my people. I want you to call me up front. I want you to do this. And those are really good ones. There's other things that pop out, which is, hey, if there's a market shift, I need you to tell me. And for me, because of what I do and what you do, there's certain things I can share and there's certain things I can't share with customers, especially if you work in that industry. You've got to make sure that you're keeping that confidentiality there. But I think really what goes on, it's more personal issues, Brian, like meaning keep me informed, call me first, tell me what's going on. And those are the things that pop out that are important to that person. And when you do that, and it's different, because you'll find that it's almost like an Olympic circle. If you've got 4 or 5 people, there's going to be some commonality there, things that are important to them. But you always have 1 or 2 of them which are unique to that individual that personally aren't important to me, and I wouldn't have thought about. But I think if you, and here's what I think, if you can figure out whether you've got good relationships. If you do an org chart of, let's say, don't take your top customer, let's say the number 10 on your list. Do an org chart and circle all the people in that org chart that you have grade A, #1 relationships with. Like, you could call on Saturday night on their cell phone, and there's a good chance they're answering. Circle those people. And if you don't have quite a few people circled, what that tells me, if you worked for me, is that you have a relationship with a couple people, maybe, but not the company. And I think you're exposed when that person, if you only circled 1, either left the company, went to a different group, different division, whatever. If you lose the business because they left, shame on you. And I think that's happened to everybody, where you've had an awesome relationship with person A. For whatever reason, they moved within the company, and they moved out of the company, and next thing you know, your whole relationship's in jeopardy. So I think you need a relationship with an organization. You've got to go deep and wide, and those are some of the things that help you do that. So let me talk a little bit about upfront contract. I said this to you early on. I think selling should be conversational. I also don't think most salespeople have a plan. I think that they kind of just, show up and throw up. I think most of us, if we do have a plan, we don't share it with our prospects. We just start into the call. And I don't know if this has happened to you, but how many times have you gone on a call thinking you had an hour, only to find out that the prospect looks at their watch and you've got 15 minutes, and they said, look, things are really crazy here today. Could we just kind of speed this up, or I've got to cut this short? And so that's a disconnect. Or you thought you were going for the close, and they thought you were just educating. And there's always these disconnects. So I think that there is 4 big things that you need to do on every call. And this is to start a fresh call. Let me put that scenario on the table. So if you're going to start a fresh call, here's what you need to do right up front, which is, and if you do believe what I said, sales is conversational, then you need to help the other person understand what you're trying to achieve on the call, or they can't help you. They can't participate. Because as buyers, you all know that you've been in a situation where the salesperson just started blowing and going. You didn't know where they were headed. And so you're trying to get your questions on the table, which human nature says, if I don't ask you what you want to get out of the call, you're going to try to weave it in, and you're only looking for a spot to weave it in. You're not listening. And since you don't know where I'm going, you're always like, is that a move, or what's going on? I don't feel comfortable. So I believe in full disclosure selling. Here are the steps. Number 1, agree on purpose. Say, listen, the reason why we're here today is X. Tell them right up front. And if they don't agree, now's the time. So just remind them. And most people say, well, I did that on the phone, or I did that in an email. Okay, I get it. But maybe they just looked at their calendar an hour before you got there. They haven't thought about you as much as you think about them. Here's the second thing, really important, time. How much time do we have for today? So I'll start a call, and I'll always say, Mary, I know we talked about an hour on the phone call for today's meeting. Is that still good? That's all I'll say. Because if she says it's actually a huge fire drill today, I'm going to know before I start. What I don't want to find out 15 minutes into it is she says you got 5 minutes because today's insane. I like to just ask her right up front. And it also helps me for her cutting it short just because that's what it is. So I always ask up front. I know we talked about an hour. Is that still good for today? Third thing that I always want to know is agendas. And 2 parts. What are the 2 or 3 things that you want to make sure I cover today? And here's the things that I want to talk about today. I tell them right up front. And I just say, in order to make it as effective as possible, Mary, is there anything that you want to make sure I cover? And I even help them. And I'll say, when I talk to CEOs like yourself, sometimes they want to know, hey, tell me a little bit about Sandler. They often want to know, have you worked with anyone else in my space? And if we do move forward, what type of return on investment can I expect? Those are some questions, but everyone's different. Is there anything that's important to you? 8 out of 10 times they'll say, those 3 things is what I want to know. And so I always pick the top 3 things that I want to talk about, actually. So, but I ask their agenda. And then I'll say, and here are the things that I would like to know as well, say, Mary. And I tell them right up front. And I do that for a couple reasons. One, they're not shocked about what I want to know during the call and what I'd like to find out. It's completely transparent. And so the anxiety level goes down. And my last thing, number 4, to start that call, is I talk about outcome. What do I like to achieve at the end of our 60 minutes together? And most people skip that one because it's high risk, but it's not high risk. And I always say, Mary, you know, after we've kind of gone back and forth for an hour, we're going to ask each other a lot of questions. Typically, I find one of 2 things will happen. We could determine, based on your situation and what we do, there's not a fit. And I think either of us should be perfectly comfortable just saying that. On the other hand, we may determine that I don't know if there's a perfect fit, but it's certainly worth investing into the next step. And let me share with you what our next step would be. And I tell them right up front, this is what it would look like. And when I do that, when I start the call, Brian, then they know for the rest of the call, they only have one big decision to make at the end. It's not whether you want to buy from me. It's, you know, are you going to take the next step? And the next step in my process would be, let's invite me back for a 2-hour meeting. And when you tell them up front what you're trying to close for, it changes the whole meeting. The questions change, everything changes because now we're in it together versus a one-sided conversation. So if no one gets anything out of the call, then at all, these things will change your life. So when you start every call, and I don't care if it's a customer or a prospect, what's the purpose? How much time do we have? What are the things that you want to make sure I cover? Here's what I'd like to cover, and let's try to make a decision on the following at the end of our meeting, whatever the following is for you. That changes depending on where you are in the selling cycle. But that is, when I meet people in an airport that see the Sandler shirt, they'll always say, hey, love that upfront contract. I use it, changed my life. So that is very cool. I want to talk a little bit about pain, but Brian, before I do, you have any, you went through it, any thoughts on upfront contract?
Yeah, I mean, the upfront contract, it does change everything because I'm trying to think of like a metaphor or analogy, but it's really establishing like the game plan for both of you in the very beginning of the call and getting buy-in and agreement. You know, like you're getting kind of like these micro commitments so early on, and because you don't have a lot of the issues. I mean, I've seen people, 30 minutes into a call, it's like, hey, I got 1 more minute, I gotta go, and they thought they had an hour, and it's like a basketball game. Like there's a certain shot clock. I remember one of the things that I used for years when I was starting is my biggest concern.
Yep.
Do you still use that with people?
We do. We do. I think that's a bit of a 201 technique. Most people first hearing, an upfront contract will say, whoa. But you want to explain that technique, or you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let everybody know, like, how I remember it, because then after a while I lost the concern. But my biggest concern was essentially we would end the meeting, we'd have no next steps, or it would be, we wouldn't know what the next step was between us. And my biggest concern is that we were going to leave the meeting and not have like a clear next step. And once I verbalized it with people, it basically removes, and I probably used it 20 or 30 times over like a year, and then all of a sudden it's like I could handle that meeting. But I guess it took whatever was in the space for me out of the space. How would you describe it?
Same thing. I think if you put a concern or a problem on the table, the prospect or customer will help you solve it. And when you own it, first of all, you're vulnerable, which they love because they'll rescue you. But when you say, hey, my biggest concern is X, they help you overcome and make sure that that's not true. And That is very cool. Think about it with your kids. Hey, my biggest concern is, you're going to do X, Y, and Z.
I'm trying it tonight. I'm already imagining. I'm like, my biggest concern, Cole and Kate, is that you guys don't go to bed when you're supposed to go to bed.
Exactly right. Yeah, and it's a slight, what we call negative sell, and people will come right at you and say, no, wait a minute, hold on. I actually would use it also, which is, my biggest fear is that at the end of the meeting, I'm going to forget to ask you about the timeline, because there's an awful lot of things that have to happen from the time that you decide that you want to move forward to the time that you implement. Would you be nice enough to help me to make sure that we just cover that for a couple minutes before we go? I say that in the first couple minutes because I know that's probably the most valuable piece of information that I needed in that particular situation. So I just say, hey, my biggest fear is I'm going to, mess it up, do this. Will you help me? And you would be shocked on how many people said, Dave, we only have a couple minutes. Let's talk about timeline. I'm like, oh, this is the greatest thing. This is awesome. So it works. Let's talk about pain. So pain is an emotional reason why people buy. Sandler came out with pain long before it was popular in the industry, so I think we've heard the term before for sure. But if I kind of cut to the chase, I think pain is really you want to become the doctor of sales. And what I mean by that is that in medical school, you're always taught that the problem the patient brings you is never the real problem. When I go and say to the doctor, I've got a back problem, they don't say, oh my gosh, you do. They ask me a ton of questions, and they find out it's actually my foot. I'm standing wrong. And so in sales, we've got to figure out what's a symptom, what's an intellectual issue, and what's the real pain. And if you were to think about what a doctor asks you when you go in and say, Doc, I've got back pain, just think about the questions that you would ask or that they would ask you. And you can mentally say them, but it's things like, how did it happen? How long have you had the back problem? What have you done? Have you got heat? Have you taken aspirin? What are you doing? What's the pain threshold, right? What's your number? How painful is it? Anyone in your family have back problems? What else? Have you gone to anyone else? They ask you all these questions because in the medical field, if you diagnose if you prescribe without all the questions, you're going to be sued. It's called malpractice. So when salespeople hear, I've got a bad service issue, that may not be the pain. What the pain is the fact that how does it impact the company? What is the ripple effect? I mean, okay, bad service, I get it. But who cares? What does that mean? And they'll start describing, well, I've lost clients and this. And then the pain also to the company, but pain to the person sitting in front of you. And I'm sick and tired of getting called into senior leadership meetings laid on the carpet because we have a service problem and we're losing revenue. And I'm being blamed by the sales group that the revenue numbers are down and blah, blah, blah. I had somebody come and say, my biggest problem is I lose about an hour and a half of my day with a complaint line outside my office. It's got to stop. They could care less about the problem. They could care less about what was going on. They didn't want to eat up all that time. So pain is personal, but people buy emotionally and then justify their decisions intellectually. And I think if we were going to take the doctor's questions that they ask you when you go in to say, hey, I've got a back problem, you could use those on a prospect. And so, for instance, hey, I've got a service issue. I'm unhappy with my current service. So what would the doctor say? They would say, well, could you give me an example? Could you be more specific? And when you ask that question, when somebody says, because they expect you to say at some level, and some salespeople do that, hey, I've got a service problem. What? Service? We're awesome at service. We've got a 32-point system for service, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, whoa, because that is your swing zone. But if you say, can you give me an example of that? I mean, tell me more about it. And once they do that, they're talking. Remember the 70-30 rule? When they're talking, now they're getting emotionally involved. They're also telling you much more about the problem of service and the ripple effect than just saying simply, I've got a service problem. And so when you say, hey, tell me more about it, well, could you give me an example, like the last time, what happened? And then if you said, well, who else, what does it affect? How does it affect the organization? Is it just you, or what happens here? They'll tell you what it affects. They'll also say, well, have you done anything to try to fix it? I mean, have you called the company and said, hey, listen, I'm having a service problem, please stop it? And so I'm asking all the same questions that the doctor would ask me, which, by the way, just like your biggest fear, that is an awesome move when somebody says, and they have a current supplier, they say, hey, we're having a real problem with X. During the conversation, when you're talking about, well, how long has it been a problem? What have you done to try to fix it? You know, what's the financial impact, or what's the if you say, well, haven't you just simply called the current company and said, this is a serious problem. It's causing me the following issues. I need it fixed. I ask that every time. And I just sit there. And they'll say, yes, I have. And I said, well, then it must be fixed. And they said, no, it's not fixed, David. As a matter of fact, here's what's going on. Blah, 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 blah. And they just go right at it. It's almost, Brian, as if they have the other rep in a headlock banging on them. It is unbelievable if you just said, well, haven't you just told them that's causing you the following issues and it's got to stop immediately? That they get hooked.
Wouldn't most people be concerned about saying that to a prospect?
Of course, because it's high risk, because you as a salesperson are thinking, if I don't say anything and I have an awesome service, hopefully they'll buy from me. But my mindset is, hey, listen, why don't we just get it on the table? Because I believe that they're going to go and talk to the current vendor anyways, even if I have a better solution. So why don't we put that conversation, which I think is going to happen in the future, why don't we put it on the table and happen right now? So I'll always bring what I think is going to happen without me, and I say, why don't you just do this? And most people say, David, why would you do that? That's such high risk. But to me, it accelerates your sale, because when they say, I have told them, and they haven't fixed it, then I say, well, what were you hoping I could do? And then you would just watch it. They've actually now just closed themselves. It's the greatest one-liner. And what were you hoping I could do? And you say it very, like when you exhale, say it very passively and watch what occurs. Pain step is where they're describing to you, they get emotionally involved, and they're actually buying, is right here. But you have to hold back and not cough up your features and benefits, because I don't think features and benefits are going to turn the tide of a sale. I think when you put people in pain and you ask all the right questions, then they're more apt to move off the dime of indecision. And that's really what this step is designed to do. So yes, it is high risk when you first learn it, but then it becomes your best friend, much like it was for you when you said, my biggest concern. So let me talk about the other steps real quick, because I know we have some Q&A. So budget. Look, this is out of whack for most people. Budget up front in our selling system. You know, I think you should talk about money, talk about it quickly. I don't think you should wait at the end. Most of us were taught from our parents, it's rude to talk about money. I get it. I never asked my father at the dinner table, hey, Dad, just out of curiosity, how we doing this year? I mean, no way. You know, it was just, hey, that's a forbidden topic. But in sales, you have to talk about it, and you got to talk about it quickly. So in the budget phase, here are the things that you have to remember.
How is that?
Go ahead.
You guys are in 36 countries. How has it changed, or how is it different in different countries? Have you noticed anything different when it comes to money?
Yes. When it comes to the upfront contract, like in Asia, they call that the agreement of respect. I'm asking it to respect your time. When it comes to money, in the U.S., and let's say it's maybe in England and some others, you can come right out and say, you said that the problem that's of bad service is costing you X. Have you put a budget aside for that to solve that issue? You can ask what their budget is. In some countries, Brian, you have to say, my range of products are anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500, and then we have another set that are about 5 to 10,000. Based on what you know about how things work internally, where do you see yourself fitting? So you have to kind of cough up your bracket in some countries culturally versus you asking directly what the budget is.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think that we've been taught at an early age that it's rude to ask for money, but we've learned as salespeople that you do have to ask the decision process. You do have to have money. I just think the cultural overtones in some of the countries are, hey, that's just never going to happen. So once you show them how to do it differently, they need the information, right? We still need the
Right.
information, but we can't just blatantly ask them, like, are you a decision maker? Oh my gosh, I mean, in some countries, they would just have a heart attack. So you just have to do it differently, but yet get the information that's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think in the budget thing, you certainly want to know, and here are the important things. When you want to tie it back to pain. So when you know that they've got these 3 problems, you know what the financial impact is to the organization, you basically want to say, here's what you've told me, here's how it's affecting the organization, do you have a budget set aside? And so you've got to figure out what they're willing to spend. If they don't know because they've never done it, or they're just not going to tell you because they just don't feel comfortable, you're going to have to do what I call bracketing, which is to give them a range and let them kind of pick, and they very quickly tell you where they fit. And you use the term bucketing. It's the same thing. It's very effective. So I love those 2 there. I also like the monkey's paw, which is sometimes salespeople look for the big sale. I think that we should also figure out, is there a smaller sale that we could make immediately that would turn this prospect into a customer? And proof's in the pudding. So if you do a good job with a mini project, then you've built credibility, you get to walk the hallways, you get to do a lot of stuff. I think a lot of salespeople are trying to go for the big deal when there's about 25 of them sitting in front of them at the same company, but they haven't gone for it.
I had
Go ahead.
I had a deal with Western Union years ago, and the guy, using all the techniques, and he said, listen, what you have is interesting, but here's the problem I have, and if you can fix it, and he just kind of like gave it to me. I was like, all right, and I had to go to my company. We had to change some stuff internally to be even able to do it, but I also had, it was a $50,000 budget. I solved that for him, and then that became $1 million a year account for us.
Because you have credibility.
Because I was also solving a problem that nobody else could solve. Yep. So I essentially was 10 times better than everything else in the market for what he was trying to do with advertising. And I can't tell you how many times the mini project, just getting started for the work, then becomes a lot more work. And frankly, a lot of buyers like to buy technology and different things that way as well, just because it's a lower commitment on their part.
I know that when we go and sell large, training programs, the best way for us, like 92% success rate, is to find a smaller pilot or do something first, and then they get comfortable, and then they're talking about X. And I think it's good for them, especially in today's economy. No one wants to make a risky decision, so they want proof in the pudding. So we're always looking for, how do we get started? How do I take you off the street? How do I make you a customer? How do I prove value? And I've always, like 92% of the time, that will turn into a larger engagement. So for us, it's a go-to strategy. We call it a monkey's paw. I think when it comes to decision, you're going to have to figure out when the decisions are made, who makes them, how are they made, and for that you got to come right out and ask. And again, budget's up front in our sales process, and decisions equally as important. I always like to draw a line on a piece of paper as if I just thought about it, and I just write on the left-hand side today's date, and I go on the other opposite side and I draw another line and I say implementation. And I always say, assuming that you've decided to do something with somebody, it doesn't even have to be us, when do you see that happening? I see that happening, I don't know, Q1. Would that be like March, February? And then I actually then use the space in between, because it's going to start to look like a football field. So on the left, I've got today's date. On the right, I have the day they would like to implement something. And then I draw a lot of hash marks, and I'm looking for 3 things. So what are the steps that need to happen between now and then for them and us? And then I always say, okay, so who's involved in each of the steps, and when do they happen? And for me, that visual timeline, I call it a visual timeline, is awesome. So, I use it every single time. I can do it verbally, the when, where, how, who, but when I draw that on a piece of paper, that is a home run. Now, here's where we are in Sandler, and I'll do the last 2 steps real quick because I see there's a ton of questions, is fulfillment and post-sale. And so in Sandler, the sale's actually done, because if I've got a good upfront contract, I've got good pain, I understand their budget, and I know my product and service fits within the budget, I understand the decision process, then really, what is there left? I just have to go back, and fulfillment for some of us is called presentation. So you've got to do presentation, which is to simply go back and present how you solve the pains. Don't over-present. Don't do, we started the company in 1916, and then we did this. Oh my gosh. Look, why don't you just say, here are your 4 problems that you've shared with me. Did I have that right? Yes, I did. Okay. And then you summarize what the budget step is. Yes. Here's how we plan on solving, attacking, dealing with those issues. And then just hit them one at a time. I'll even ask, out of these 4 problems, which one do you want us to deal with first today? And it's never the first one that I actually have in my presentation book. It's never. That's the first one that they told me about, but it's really not the biggest problem. And so I'm very flexible in my presentation. I'll say, which one would you like to see me deal with first? Number 3. I say, okay, great. Just out of curiosity, I thought you were going to pick the first one. Why number 3? Well, because here's it, I've got a ton of information I didn't have 10 minutes ago. And I say, great, here's how we're going to solve that problem. And then I do it. Every time I solve a pain, I'm going to close. Here's what I say. Based on what my solution is, are you comfortable that that would solve the issue for you? And I know I've got a ton more to talk about, but are you comfortable with how we would deal with this problem? Because here's what I don't think works. You get to the end of the presentation and say, what do you think? Most people forget about their questions midway through the presentation, and B, they're making decisions along the way. So I want to ask you along the way, hey, are you comfortable with how I'm going to solve this problem? And I want a yes. If it's a no, why continue? You might as well deal with how you're going to solve that before you get to issue number 2. And go throughout the process. So prepare, don't over-present, and ask them if they're comfortable after you present to each of the solutions. Post-sell. Post-sell for us is really dealing with buyer's remorse and getting referrals and moving it from sales to service or sales to anyone else if that's what you're doing. So I think everybody has buyer's remorse. And so Sandler, it's counterintuitive, but for me, I'm going to deal with buyer's remorse. And so what I'm going to do is I'll bring up a minor objection. So let's just hypothetically say, hey, I was hoping that you had this particular product in red, and I don't have it in red, let's say, but I dealt with it throughout the process. It seemed to be fine. I will say here, listen, after I've closed, they've said yes. Before I leave, and again, you don't have to do this because you're going to think it's high risk, but it's actually perfect. Before you leave, hey, I just want to make sure you're 100% comfortable. I know a couple months ago you said red. You're okay with the gray, but I just want to make sure, are you 100% okay with the gray? And I'm taking a minor objection and just making sure that they're comfortable with it now. Because here's why. If I don't deal with buyer's remorse in front of them, they're going to have it without me. Now, does every Sandler client throw an objection back on the table? No. Do the super productive and, do they? Yeah, of course. Because if it's a problem, I promise you it's going to be a problem in an hour and it's a problem in 2 days. If they say, no, hey, listen, actually, I'm okay with that. Gray's okay. Here's why. That's a closed issue. It's done. Otherwise, in my mind, it's festering. And then I'm also dealing with referrals. See, I think you should get referrals as quickly as possible in that process. And so you have to ask yourself, when you're sitting there and a prospect says to you, so what do you got? Where are you? I mean, you're going to have to say, hey, but I'm happy to answer all that. Before we start, do you mind if I just kind of set the agenda for our meeting today? You're going to have to take control back, because otherwise what happens is you're going to be in this what I call wimp junction, which is you're either going to wimp out and just follow their process, or you're going to set the stage and have equal business stature in my mind and kind of lead the dance. I don't think you have to be aggressive. I do think you have to have a plan. I do think you have to figure out where you'd like to go. I never do anything unless I know what my next step is, and I think that's important. And Brian talked earlier on, and we can do Q&A about reinforcement. And that is our thing. I think that you're going to have to practice. It's muscle memory. That's all sales is. It's muscle memory. I can't go to the golf course once a quarter and expect to be any good at it. So, you know, Brian said it early on. He went to the Sandler stuff and just kind of heard this technique and tried it, heard that technique the next time and tried it, and that's really what it is. So you've got to pick like maybe 2 or 3 things that you want to implement in your world and change and work on those things and then go back. And as usual, happy to give you a couple things if you'd like. One is an ebook. If you have any interest in getting the written version of what I've tried to share with you today, and probably in a more comprehensive manner than what we tried to shove 36 years into an hour, it's in that book. It's called Why Salespeople Fail. It's awesome. You're welcome to it. It's free. Just download it. If you want to go to a session that Brian went to, or any of us, we've got 265 training centers. Be my guest. I mean, look at a topic. If it's how to get pain, or if it's how to take control of a sales call, or if it's how to do whatever, presentation skills, come to a session. You're welcome to it. You're not going to get stalked. They'll set a good upfront contract with you, and it's kind of simple, and you're welcome to come. And so hope you'd enjoyed it. I mean, I know that I had to cover an awful lot in a short amount of time. My goal was not to necessarily convert you to Sandler, but to more importantly give you some tactics and strategies that you can use. And I know, Jason, that there's lots of questions. People like to stay afterwards. For those that we have a time commitment, please feel free. We're recording it. We can send it to you later. Any questions that come up, Mike or Jason, that you want to figure out what we got that I could help answer?
Hey, Dave. It looks like a lot of the questions have been answered. If there's any, you guys have any new questions, go ahead and type in the question box. And while we have Dave on the line here, it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think, you know, at Sandler, we're going to, and you as a salesperson, as you're waiting for the questions, I think you have to work on 3 things in professional sales: attitude, behaviors, and techniques. Sandler's known for technique. We have great techniques. But really what makes salespeople great is a behavior. So we do the daily behaviors and create that muscle memory, and then think differently. You don't have to be subservient, you know, and you don't have to be fearful of rejection. You don't have to be fearful of success. If you work on all those 3 things equally, you will be awesome. So,
all right, Dave, I got a couple of questions for you. First one is, when we were doing the middle steps there, what happens if the pain is not one you can solve, or the budget's not big enough, or you can't work inside their decision-making process?
okay, so first of all, that's good news if you know it, right? It's the bad news is if you never figured that out. So if they have pain that you can't solve with your product or service, come right out and say it. And I've said that a million times. It would sound something like, Mary, I appreciate you sharing that. That's not what we're great at. I could probably introduce you to somebody that's good at that, but that's not what we excel at. What would you like to do? I mean, there may be some other areas, and then offer some other things that you think you could help on based on what she's said, but call it. If she said, well, that's my only problem, think about what you've done. Don't think about it as a loss. Think about you have just saved yourself months of time. So that's cool. I like another one is, what happens if they don't have the budget? Well, if I say, hey, my products are ranging anywhere from 15 to 30,000, and we've got larger implementations that are 50 to 200,000, and they say, well, I've got 1,000. Let's just say it's unrealistic. I would simply say, I can do 2 things. One, I could do a monkey's paw and simply ask them, well, let's make an assumption for a second. If, in fact, you had 100% commitment and belief that I could solve those problems, is the money available somewhere at some point in time, or is that never available? And I would ask that in a gentle, nurturing way. If they say, no, that's my budget, then I have to make a decision. Do I have anything that would help them, maybe a smaller product or service? If not, I would simply say, well, based on your budget, which, by the way, I appreciate you sharing, I don't see a way that I could help you, because here's my issue. My pricing structure is X, Y, and Z. I'm not sure how we can overcome that. Do you have any ideas? And I always make it their issue as well. So I'll say, here's my problem, like Brian said, my biggest concern, and then I say, is there a solution that you see? Because I'm stuck. But as a salesperson, I don't want to be stuck on my own. I want them to unstick me, and that's how I do it. But it's okay. Look at it as a victory that you have saved time if you find that they do not qualify for one of those areas, because you've got to find prospects that are willing and able to purchase. They could be willing but unable. They could be able but unwilling. So you've got to look for that, you know, that perfect combination for you to be successful.
Awesome. And our next one comes in the post-sale step. They were wondering, how do you specifically ask for a referral? Do you have any language that you like?
Yeah. So actually, we're a big believer in LinkedIn. There's two different ways. One is if I'm looking at my customer base and I notice that they're connected with somebody, I simply send an email to them and I'll say to them, hey, Mary, I noticed that you're connected with Bill. How well do you know them? Would you be comfortable enough to introduce me to Bill? As a matter of fact, I've created a quick introductory letter for you. Feel free to edit it, but I sure would love your help. 85% of the time, Mary will send that letter as is to Bill, and now you're in the running. So that's good. Now here's the other one if I'm face-to-face. And I'll simply say, listen, there's probably 1,000 people that you're interacting with on a daily basis that you know, but there's always people what I would consider in your inner circle. Those are the people that you probably call and you can share some of your issues at work and they're willing to lend you an ear, mentoring, coaching, but people that you have a trust factor with. Are there 3 or 4 people that come to mind when I call it that inner circle? And they'll always say, yeah, sure, I've got those people. Well, knowing what I do and the types of problems that I solve, in that small group of people, who do you think I may be able to help? And that's how I'll do it, because here's what doesn't work. When you say, who else besides yourself that you know, do you think you could work that would need my product or service, that is too big picture. They go to nobody. Immediately you'll hear, I can't think of anybody. But if you say, think about a smaller subgroup, and you can decide the subgroup. I always think of the people that you can call with a business problem, but you could say, if I sold technology, hey, my mainframe's down, I'm not sure how to solve it. Who in your business environment would you call for, hey, help me understand this issue? And so you can put the framework around it, but that's how I'll do it. It's called the inner circle technique. Get a smaller pod, let them think about 4 or 5, 10 people, and then ask, based on what I do and the problems that I solve, if you were me, who do you think would be a best fit for maybe just a quick conversation? And that's how I would do it.
Awesome. I got an easy one and a hard one. Which one do you want first?
Let's try the easy one first.
All right. The easy one is, do you bring up potential problems in the post-sale step if they can't think of any? Or really any time during the call?
Yeah, I think that's a judgment call. What I find myself doing is I say, okay, great, I just wanted to make sure. That's one technique. Or I could say, okay, I just wanted to make sure. I know earlier on you brought up something about red. It didn't seem to come up. I just want to make sure that was good. So if something did come up and they forgot about it, it's okay to bring it up. If nothing came up and they said, no, I'm good, that's okay. Close the file. I just always say, I just want to make sure that you're 100% comfortable. And I've dealt with every issue, and there's nothing that's kind of just nagging at you. And they'll say, no, I'm good. Then I'm fine with that. You don't have to make a problem if there is no problem, right? So don't make your life miserable. So what's the hard one?
And the hard one is, we're going to see how well you do at your own system. About 3 people asked how much Sandler training costs for an individual. How would you handle somebody asking about price right at the beginning?
So I think it's almost like a buffet. You can take as much or as little as you want. So you can have anything from one-day programs. So you're on the low end of about $500 to go to a boot camp. All the way up to about $1,500 for the boot camps. And if you're going to go into the reinforcement stuff that Brian went to, that I grew up in, you're in a different bracket, anywhere from $5 to $10 grand. But it kind of varies depending on how often and what you're looking for. but that's kind of what it is. If I was an individual person kind of dipping my toe, I could probably go to a boot camp for under $1,000. If it was a company that's looking for, hey, I want to see Sandler 15 times, then it kind of changes as is.
All right, good. And any specific advice on handling that question up front? What if they're asking you to do the prospect system? Yeah, they say, yeah, all that sounds great, or we're not really interested. What's it cost?
Oh, yeah, here's what I would say. If somebody says, oh, listen, stop asking me questions, how much does it cost? I'd say, I'd be with two ways to do it. If somebody's pushing you, I'd say, I'd be happy to answer that. Can I ask you 2 questions so I can formulate my answer so I can answer you and making sure that it's right on target? So if somebody says, well, what's going to cost my company? I would say, Mike, I'm happy to answer that for you. As a matter of fact, if you give me about 30 seconds, I just need 2 answers to a couple questions, and then I'm happy to give you that number. Was that fair? Yes. Here's my question number 1. And then I would do it that way. If they said, if I didn't like that one, it's not my personality type, let's say, then I would bracket it. I said, hey, I don't know enough yet, Mike. We haven't had a conversation, so I'm not sure. But let me tell you, based on my 20 years experience, we're going to end up in one of these 2 areas. It's going to be somewhere between X, Y, and Z, or if it's a full-blown program because you're 100% comfortable and you're going to do like XYZ company did, you're in the range of A, B, and C. So you could either bracket it quickly or just say, I'd happy to answer it. Matter of fact, if you give me about 30 seconds, I can answer it. Can I ask you 2 very direct questions? And that's how you get more information, because here's what happens. You have leverage. They want to know the money. You can ask those direct questions to help you give them the money answer, but you now have more information.
Great. And the next ones kind of deal with complex sales. So what do you do about a group? Do you try and do this thing on a webinar, or how do you do the Sandler submarine to a group? And then we had another one, which is very large international deals. If they start by like issuing an RFP to 70 countries, and it's completely wrong and you don't really know how to respond to the RFP, it's going to take months. How do you do that?
Okay, so let's do RFPs. I believe that you are deserving, entitled to a conversation before you do RFPs. And so when I get RFPs, and I get them on a weekly basis, I'll always, and they'll say, please submit by X, Y, and Z. I'll just send, hey, Sandler, here's who we are. We've won all these things. We've done this. Unfortunately, we need to have a quick conversation before I'm even able to respond to this, because there's so much complexity. There are different ways that we could answer this. I may have to respectfully decline in responding to the RFP if we're unable to have a quick 30-minute phone call. And you'd be shocked of how many people will call you and say, wait a minute now, what do you need to know? Now, you know, are there government sales where you're going to have all the questions up front and answered? Yeah, of course, we do. We teach that group as well. But I think the mindset is, hey, get a conversation. If somebody wants it live, when I hear it's a blind RFP, there's no talking to anybody, here's my mindset, only because I know my numbers. We win less than 2% of those. Here's what I say. That was sent out to a bunch of people to justify their current decision. I'm not one of them. That's my mindset. And I have the numbers for me to prove that I'm right. So I don't waste months, years, and all that other stuff. As far as group sales, you can use the submarine the same way. And I could do the upfront contract the same way. How much time do we have? What do we want to get out of that? Mary, what would you like to just make sure that I answer for today? Bill, what would you want to make sure? Bum, bum, bum. Here's what I'd like to know. Is that any issue? Here's what I'd like us to decide. You can go right through. I think what you have to do is to make sure that people in the committee or group are participating. So you got to pull them in. But the Sandler selling system works. We have something which you're welcome to download as well, which is the Enterprise Sales Course, and that is for large, complex sales. It's this submarine, the Sandler selling system, baked in to a 6-step process, which is specifically designed for long, complex sales where you're selling in a team to people who buy in a team.
Great. Then let's move to decision a little bit. In the decision-making process, how do you work with the economic buyers and incorporate the top people? Can you talk about cast of characters a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So obviously you're going to have different people who are concerned about different things, right? And you're also going to have a situation where you're not in front of all the buyers. So I always like the artificial decision-making process. And so if I were in front of Mike, let's say you, if I use you as the example, and I know that there's probably 3 people that are involved in the decision that I'm not even in front of, I would do this. First of all, I'd say, hey, Mike, based on what you've seen, and I know there's a bunch of other people involved, would you be comfortable recommending us or moving forward? That's my first thing. So I want to close you, even though I know you're one of many. And you'll always say, but it's not my decision. I've got a ton of people. I said, I knew that up front. I just want to know where you, based on what I've said, how do you feel? Where do you stand? And so I'll ask that. Here's my second thing, and this is called rehearsal, and this is very important. I'll say, Mike, think about the people who are not here today that you're going to have to go back and relay all this information to. Each one of them is probably concerned about something different. So if you think about them mentally, what type of questions would each one of them ask you? Let's just get them on the table real quick. And you're going to hear a bunch of big, well, the IT person's going to want to know this, my purchasing agent's going to want to know this, and I'll say, great. How are you going to handle those? Would you want me to help you with crafting some quick answers to that? And that's called rehearsal, and that's very, very effective. So when I'm in front of different types of buyers, if I'm in front of an economic buyer, I'll talk about cost stuff, like how much is the problem costing you? And then I'll ask things like, well, is that a lot of money? And then I'll ask things like, hey, would you like to talk about ROI? Or how are you going to measure, your return on investment? How do you plan on doing that? So I kind of shape all of my questions around things that are important to them, which are how much, when, how do I judge it, how do I get out of it? And I think if you look at your different types of buyers, if you just sat in their chair and said, what are the top 2 or 3 things that this person cares about, you weave it into that conversation. And again, that's all
awesome.
Pre-call planning stuff. Yeah. So I think if you, and I'm relying on time, but I think if you want the enterprise selling, you can get it on Sandler.com. If you want some of the things that we've talked about, which are in this book, I just didn't get to say them due to the hour, but due to the questions, I kind of brought them up here in the last 10 minutes. Go to the Why Salespeople Fail. But again, if you'd like to sit in as my guest, please do so. And so I'll do the best I can to answer questions after the fact. I know I can see people saying, hey, we're running over, which we are for sure. But I'm happy to do any of those things. And as usual, I'm a big fan of Breakthrough Email. I'm a big fan of theirs. So, and they incorporate some of the Sandler tactics and philosophies in their approach. So I think it's very symbiotic. And I appreciate the time being here today. So thanks for all your help, Jason and Mike, doing the Q&A. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at a session or maybe getting an email and helping you any way I can. So until we see each other, hey, good selling.